Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Well, I had a background primarily most of my life in sales, but over that time, I got to really understand not only myself overcoming many obstacles and a major transformation I went through 22 years ago, but also really to understand how people communicate and how they lead. And from that, I was able to migrate into coaching, and it's become a passion of mine working with individuals and companies, how to lead effectively by example and be a resource to build more winning, engaging teams, empowering others to own their role and duties in their jobs and so on.
Awesome. And what do you like about coaching in particular?
It's just something, I guess it's been born into me. I come from a family of teachers. My mother was a teacher. My aunts and uncles were teachers. I have cousins that are teachers. My mother always said, you would make a great teacher. And I say, I am teaching and I am educating. That's not in a traditional role like a teacher would in a school, but yet I'm doing it as an executive coach. But I also do some adjunct faculty work for 2 universities in their business program that are non-accredited. So I help them to really help build some value in terms of applied knowledge to businesses that are around where those schools are located.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, coaching is a wonderful thing, and I love doing it as well with people. And I just like seeing them getting the light bulb moment or that transformational situation or that insight that really just changed their lives, their teams and all their organizations, which is a wonderful thing to see for sure. Hey, Christopher, you talked about you got into sales and so forth. So how did you get into leadership?
Leadership was just something that came natural to me. I've always had this uncanny ability where people would come and open up to me, meaning that they would tell me things that they wouldn't tell their bosses, wouldn't tell their peers, wouldn't even tell their significant others. So the fact that I had this ability probably led, I didn't know it at the time, was that I had this ability to connect where people were. So if people were feeling vulnerable or if they felt incompetent, maybe they didn't know enough, they didn't want to disclose this information to people they work for, fearing they might lose credibility, might lose their job. But yet people felt very comfortable talking to me about that. And because of that vulnerability and transparency, those are 2 strengths that allow an individual to grow from where they are into everything that they desire to be. I just had this ability to do that and help people move along through being the messenger, being someone that related and understood where they were at and shared from experience, empowering them to take ownership of where they were and where they desired to be to go from there. So I guided them and gave them the blueprint. But first, connecting on shared values, connecting at a place where they felt comfortable, where they could be vulnerable and transparent to start moving forward.
Yeah, that ability to connect with people where they are at is a really important skill to have. And I think a lot of leaders nowadays, they're not doing that because they're running, as I said in my introduction, email to email, meeting to meeting, and they're overwhelmed and they're finding it a little bit difficult to be able to do that. But they just probably need to get themselves out of the way and allow them to be there present with people. And I think being present is probably one of the biggest things that a lot of leaders could do today. What's your thoughts on that?
You just nailed it, Dennis. It is about being present. See, if we're going to be effective leaders, we have to be able to lead by example and be a resource. So if we're not being the example of everything that we're looking to do to inspire people that work for us to own their role and own their duties, then all we're going to be stuck in doing is telling people how, when, or why to do something. And when they're not doing it to the level that you anticipate, then it's just going to lead to more telling and more conflict and things not getting done. You're operating from expectations tied to outcomes that operate in the past and future in terms of thinking. So as leaders, we have to be present. We have to learn to think differently in a way to be different, to become different, to do different, and then have different, better results. Well, we can shift away from telling people how, when, to, why to do something and share from experience, being that example and being a resource rather than pleasing and enabling others, and shifting our result process into the moment of trusting what we know and what we can control and maximizing that and letting go of everything else and not tying ourselves to the expectations of the outcomes. We'll have far better results and more likely to inspire people through our example and our resources to do the same over time, creating more future leaders in their role and duties.
Yeah, great. Yeah, being the role model or example to inspire people. I love that. The thing is, that's probably quite a good segue into the next question here. And Christopher, this could be a little bit interesting for you in the sense that you've probably got many, but let's just think about one in particular if you can. Who's your favorite leader? Now, this person could be alive or from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
Wow, I have so many favorite leaders out there. I would have to say that I respect my wife, number one, because my wife is always the example. I respect Richard Branson is one. And here's why I respect Richard Branson. Because Richard Branson is highly transparent from day one. He knows his strengths. He knows his weaknesses. When you think of that name, Sir Richard Branson, you think that this man could do no wrong. Like, he is an expert and he has strengths in almost every aspect of doing business. But he'll be the first to tell you that's not the case. And he's someone that will say yes to something knowing that he sees an opportunity, but yet will say that I don't have all the answers. I've made mistakes. And this is an individual that also leads by example, meaning that he shares from experience. He inspires people on his teams, whether depending upon what business it is, to take ownership over their role and duties and create an environment that, regardless of title, that people can really grow into their strengths, offset their weaknesses, and create more interdependency in those types of work environments. So he would be one that comes to mind. Another one is Mary Barra from GM. This was a woman who grew up in that old school men's world of running a bureaucratic business. She grew up with sexual harassment and all these bureaucratic things that how companies used to run in the day. And throughout her career, rose through the ranks and was able to transform General Motors to where it is today, where it operates from a place of servant leadership, a combination of servant, visionary, and then also coaching a style of leadership. So it's a completely different environment than it was 20 plus years ago. And so for being a woman leader who I respect highly, she is someone I hold in high regards as well.
I'll start with the easy stuff, which is right back to the start. As you said, I'm born in Papua New Guinea. I'm a Papua New Guinean citizen. I'm proud of my PNG heritage, and I enjoy being able to come back to Papua New Guinea to add value after working and setting up a life in Australia. The Brian Bell Group was started in 1958. It's a 63-year-old business that started as a little gun shop in a small suburb in Port Moresby called Ella Beach, and it's grown to be one of Papua New Guinea's most recognised business brands. Certainly not the biggest retailer in the country, but highly respected and regarded, and our team over the 63 years have done a wonderful job in building the reputation of the business, really focused on providing quality service and value. And I am fortunate to have two wonderful daughters, a beautiful wife. They live in Australia and I work in PNG. FaceTime and all the modern communications are how we go about life. And that's not uncommon for people and COVID certainly has made that a bit of a challenge for us. But no, I'm delighted to be back working in PNG and with the team here that are doing some amazing things to change the way our customers shop in our business and give back to the community in a really positive way. So it's a great environment to be in.
That's excellent. And I see with the retail and so forth, especially with the lockdowns and that we're relying a lot on supermarkets, of course, to actually provide us the food and everything we need to be able to survive as we stay at home for sure. It's a really important aspect of our life at the moment too, along with what you just said around FaceTime and technology, helping us stay in touch with family and friends and loved ones around the world, especially when we can't go and visit them for sure. So it's real important stuff. Hey, Ian, how did you get into leadership?
Look, I think I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by leaders as a child. My grandfather started the business. My father was obviously involved in the business at a senior level. I was influenced by people running a business and leading teams of people from a very early age. I decided to go and forge my own identity and learn a little bit more about retail outside of the Papua New Guinea environment and moved to Australia. And I came from an environment where you were expected to work hard all the time. And for me, as an early person, I didn't have aspirations to be a leader of such, but take on more significant roles. And slowly that formed some leadership credibility amongst the people that I was working with. And I had some really strong mentors over the time that provided me opportunity to then take on more and more. All of a sudden, one minute you're stacking shelves or doing things that just need to be done, to suddenly responsible for and accountable for more significant parts of the business. So I'm fortunate that I'd argue that in some ways I was surrounded by it early and that influenced me very quickly. And others, I think I've just been fortunate that I've had good mentors that have identified that maybe I had some leadership qualities that were valuable and helped to steer me to a place where I could use those.
Yeah. Okay, good. So you mentioned a couple of things I want to do a little bit of a deep dive on. One is around your own identity. Do you think developing your own leadership identity is important?
I absolutely do, Dennis. I think that if I just talk personally for a minute, I was born into a family that had a small business that was growing. It was recognized as a teenager. You want to be your own person and recognized for your own skills, etc. And I was working in an environment where everyone knew who I was because of my father and my grandfather. So, when you get to 19 and everywhere you go, someone says, "Oh, you're Sir Brian's grandson," or "You're Trevor's son." I decided that maybe it was time that I went and learned some things and set my own course, because it was important that I built my own credibility or brand as such, and decided off I'd go and do my own thing. The expectation was for a short period of time. It turned out to be much longer than that. I always tell people that I was a very slow learner, but I think that your own credibility, your own style, your own, I'm going to call it brand, but that's very important, because when you talk about reputations, when you talk about integrity, authenticity is very important. And I think for me, it's really important that people identify what it is they stand for and work really hard to maintain that expectation of those people around them.
Yeah, that's good. Very good. So yeah, your brand, but there's so many things you just covered off there, which is brilliant. The second area I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive on, and which is you talked about having some strong mentors around you. How important is it for people to actually think about who are either wanting to get into leadership or are at a certain leadership level, but they want to go to more senior levels or to a larger scale? How important is it for them to have mentors, and what should they do to try and find a mentor?
Look, and Dennis, I think it's critical. I think that no one is going to realize their potential without support. I know that there's plenty of examples where people have, but I think that if they reflect on their journey, there will always be people that have influenced them either directly or indirectly. And so I think that having some people around you that can provide you with some steer, some direction, some guidance, some honesty around the things that you need to be doing to go to the places that you want to from a leadership perspective is a critical part of your development. And I've been very fortunate along the way that while I might not have realized it at the time, but that I had people that were invested in my success or at least me doing well, whether it was to support them in their roles or just to see me be the best that I could be. I think that's really important. And I think it's important that you have close contacts, whether they're inside the business or outside your work environment, that know you well, that provide you with that steer. I credit a lot of things to a lot of people, but I also can't underestimate the patience and tolerance of my wife, who knows me better than anyone and just belts me around the head every now and then when it's time to say, this is what you need to have a good hard look at. And those sorts of conversations are really important.
Yeah, I think the words that you used before about having them being honest and having some honesty with you and having that honest conversation, and you called it a belt around the head a couple of times. I think at the end of the day, it's really what we talk about is that there are people who have got, as you said, vested interest in you. They've got your back, but they've got your back in a good way, in the sense that they want to look after you and make sure you succeed. And so having those honest conversations is going to be really important for sure. Excellent. Ian, you may have several here, but I'm going to ask you this question in the sense of, who is your favorite leader? Now, this person could be alive or from history, but who's your favorite leader and why?
I think that's a really tough question for me, Dennis, if I'm honest. I think about when people ask me this question, who I would consider my favorite leader. I think that there's not one person that I say to me influences the things that I've learned from, or the environments that I've been in that I've taken the most from. I'd say I take lots of little pieces from the people that I see, or the people that influence me. I love seeing stuff on Nelson Mandela. I love reading about people like Abraham Lincoln, because they're pioneers or they've demonstrated amazing courage. I was still am a big Barack Obama fan, because you're talking about breaking down barriers and a guy who can inspire people with a conversation. For me, in terms of favourite leader, I've got some people that I've worked with that really have influenced me over my journey. There's a gentleman that I worked with in the Coles West Farmers world for a number of years, who could only be described as firm but fair and genuinely invested in your success. And Mark was a very strong influence on my development as a leader. But I can't put it down to one person. I always look to people for whether they have an authenticity, whether they can inspire people, whether they deliver messages that you take away and reflect on a regular basis because they're meaningful. And so it's a tough question to answer with just one person. I think if I could wash off one leader alive or dead, it would be a person who embodies all of those qualities that are important to me: authenticity, honesty, integrity, inspiration. So there are people that have probably got elements of all of that. And if you're taking those elements and making one person, I'm not sure they're out there, but maybe I haven't found them yet.
Hello, Dennis. It's my pleasure to be on the show.
It's great to have you here. Now, I've told our listeners a little bit about your background. Is there anything else? Tell me, is there anything else you'd like to share about your background?
Honestly, no. I actually always hate that question. I recently turned 60, and I was being asked by a prospective new client in India to tell me about themselves. And I just realized that, I said, how far do you want me to go back? And she said, to the beginning. I said, well, you weren't even born at the beginning. So the potted history of who I am is English by birth. I went to an English grammar school. I was a pretty good science student, and I had my eyes set on being a doctor. I was influenced by those movies, Doctor in the House. They merged my boys' grammar school with a girls' high school just before my A-levels, and I got distracted. And I didn't get the grades for medicine, but I got the grades for physiotherapy. So I graduated as a physiotherapist way back in 1982, hence the reason why I was saying this girl wasn't even born yet. I worked for a couple of years in hospitals, and that taught me a lot about organization and hierarchy. And then I did what most male physios do, is I got involved in sport. I was a physio with the Bally Rombear and the First Division Soccer Club. I won't mention it just in case I upset some of the listeners. People are very, very loyal to their team. So I was a sports physio, moved to Australia in the 80s. As an entrepreneur, I set up a chain of physiotherapy and acupuncture clinics, because by this time I had a postgraduate in traditional Chinese medicine. And I got interested in holistic wellness, and I purchased a gym and turned it into a holistic wellness center. And I was ahead of my time because I was disrupted by the movement of US and South African big gym chains into Australian market. And I tried to compete on price when I was in fact delivering service, and I lost everything. And so in the year 2000, I wasn't taken out by the Y2K bug. I was taken out by business reality, and I lost everything. I lost houses, cars, self-esteem, sense of purpose. And I was living in a backpackers hostel in King's Cross, which was not a very nice area of Sydney at that time. And that's when I had the revelation, after a period of licking my wounds and feeling sorry for myself, that I actually needed to practice what I preach around the mental toughness and resilience to come back. And that's where I formulated and began to articulate my message on self-leadership, which has been my area of speaking, coaching, consulting, writing ever since that time.
Self-leadership, listeners, Andrew's just sharing. Practice what you preach. That's a pretty cool statement just there. We could probably end the episode just on that. But I think it's a very powerful statement that you've just made there. And what do you mean, practice what you preach? What should people do about that, Andrew?
It really is the core of authenticity, right? I had worked with athletes looking at goal setting and visualization, and I'd spoken to people about being successful. But here I was, knocked for six, as it were, and I had to get a hold of my own mental attitude. And thankfully, I had previously read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks about, that the last of all human freedoms is the freedom to choose our own attitude. And of course, that really is the heart of self-leadership. And so I had to face my reality. And I use an acronym now with my clients: accept the reality. It is what it is. There's no point complaining that it's not fair. I have to accept this is the reality. I have to adjust my behaviors if I want to advance. So that accept, adjust, and advance. And the definition that I use with my co-author of a 2012 book we wrote on the topic of self-leadership is the practice of intentionally influencing your thinking, feeling, and actions towards your objectives. So key here is leadership is always about taking people to group goals. So you have to have outcomes. You have to decide that you want to move somewhere. And you have to take ownership and responsibility of your thoughts, feelings, and actions towards that. Nobody's going to turn up on a white horse and rescue you. You got to do it yourself to the most fun. That doesn't mean you don't reach out and ask for help, but you ask for help in a way that, hey, I'm doing this. Will you join me in the endeavor? Not will you do it for me? And the key to the definition is it's the practice of intentionally influencing. But the great Zig Ziglar, the sales motivational speaker of the United States, used to talk about motivation is like taking a shower. The effect is not permanent. And just self-leadership is a daily practice. Every day that you wake up, you open your eyes, you take a shower, you get your clothes on, you go to work, or you look after your family, whatever it is that you do, you start anew. You have to get your attitude and then you have to get your actions right.
Yeah, excellent. And Andrew, when you've been sharing that, is that actually how you got into leadership, that through losing the other business and so forth and then getting into the leadership side, or was there something else that got you into leadership?
It was a little bit of both. So I'd already before the collapse of my business, I'd already started speaking and I'd spoken at various business conferences. After I lost everything, I was building back my consulting business. And I came to the attention of a managing director of a company who realized that as a physiotherapist, I'd helped his sports team improve. And he said, why don't you come and work with my management team because they suck? And the interesting thing was I turned up with a tabula rasa, a blank sheet of paper, unlike consulting companies who turn up with their methodology, right? And prescribe them. I went with a curiosity and I'd learned NLP modeling skills and I had my background in traditional Chinese medicine looking at what are the influences that create the reality. So I went into his team with open eyes and a blank notebook and I noted what was working, what was not. What were the drivers for performance? What were the inhibitors to performance? And I began to make some changes and they were successful. And then I realized I was onto something, but I had a bit of imposter syndrome because I didn't have an MBA and I thought that's what I needed to be a leadership consultant. So I went off to do an MBA. And on the organizational behavior and leadership course, I kept arguing with the lecturer because he was saying there's this theory and there's this theory. I go, yeah, but how does that work in reality? And he said, we've got some good questions. Why don't you go and do your own research and write your own book? And the rest, as they say, is history.
They laid the challenge down and you went out and wrote the book. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, very good. Yeah. Hey, Andrew, that's some really cool stuff that you're sharing there. And here's a question for you, and that is, who's your favorite leader? Now, this person could be from history or alive. Who's your favorite leader and why?
So thank you for the question, Dennis, but it's a trick question. And it's one that I get asked a lot and I refuse to answer. And the reason is that if you personify somebody, you run a huge risk because leadership is always about context. And I think this is something that a lot of leadership speakers miss. It's about context. It's time, place. You're the right leader for the right place. So for instance, growing up as an Englishman, of course, I was influenced by Sir Winston Churchill, our wartime leader. He's hard to miss with his V sign and we will fight them on the beaches. But for the most of his political career and military career, Winston Churchill was an abject failure. And in fact, he did some terrible things. And you talk to Indians and they don't like Winston Churchill because he resisted Gandhi and the independence of India. Talk to New Zealanders and Australians. Winston Churchill was an architect of Gallipoli, where the Anzus died on the beaches. You'd say Winston was the right leader at the right time and the right type of leader.
Right.
I recently, when I was in Singapore, saw Barack Obama, and I love Barack Obama for his oratory. We're seeing that he also oversaw the Afghan war, and he also didn't do what was necessary. Drone strikes under Barack Obama increased like crazy. So oratory on the one side, but he failed to leave a legacy. He failed to leave a succession plan. So we could criticize him. We could pictures from sport. I remember when we used to use Tiger Woods as an example for somebody who was open to getting coaching. And then Tiger Woods, of course, blew up his marriage very publicly. So I would avoid picking one individual because although I challenge the leadership theory, I have studied leadership theory and I actually, ironically, teach on MBA programs now. And leadership is always about the leader's style, the follower's motivation and skill set, and the situational context. And so I think leadership starts from the inside out. A leader could be a single mom bringing up a couple of kids on a limited budget. And to that end, I used to talk about J.K. Rowling because I think her story is very inspirational. And then J.K. Rowling blew up in the public space with her antagonism towards transgenders. So you see how it's fraught with difficulty, that question.
Andrew, stop talking about these leaders because they keep blowing up after you talk about them. I know it's quite funny how it all is. And what I'm getting from this is that for all of us as leaders, we can become leaders based on the context and what's going on in the situation. And of course, we can learn from everybody and take those learnings and do something with it, which is really important for us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.